we're proving here is the internal growth rate. Okay? So we can see that at a sales growth rate of 1%, and, well, at a sales growth rate of 1%, we would have a surplus. So, of course, we don't need to seek external financing. At a sales growth rate of 2%, then we would indeed have a deficit, in which case we would need to seek external financing. So somewhere between 1 and 2%, we would break even, if you will. So,
Assuming you have a deficit and you went out and got the loans or issued new stock or whatever, when you have to figure in the interest on that issuance?
yeah, and that's where we get into those iterations that I talked to you about yesterday. You're correct about that if you wanted to get it right down to the dollar. My point, what I'm trying to get across, is simply that this is a forecast, so what this means is we're going to have to raise some money. So we need to start planning for that process. That's what I mean, because you guys all know that you can't just decide today that you're going to do a bond issue or a stock issue and then go issue it tomorrow and raise the money. It takes a while to do that. Okay. But yeah, yes, you're correct.
Professor Swin.
Sir.
Sorry, man, I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to wrap my head around why I need money if I got more assets than liabilities. It seems to me like it's the opposite way around.
No, because if you have more assets than liabilities, look at just one asset. If the reason you have more assets than liabilities is because of your inventory, what that's telling you is you got to buy a lot of inventory to support that sales growth rate. And you're going to have to figure out how to finance it. That's what that's telling you. Okay. Other questions? I told you I like questions, especially in a class like this where you guys all have slightly different finance backgrounds. So some of you may have seen this before, some of you haven't. Some of you have a lot of exposure to Excel, some of you have very little. Some of you have worked up with CAPM a lot, some of you barely know what CAPM is. Okay, that's the reality of what I deal with in this course. So when you ask me questions, that helps me deal with that. So other questions? Yeah.
I'm just playing around with the spreadsheet here, and I got it where the external financing needed is 0, but it still says deficit because it's off by $1.
So
just,
well,
just route it like that.
Well, all right.
Why doesn't it say balance?
Okay, hold that 1 second, because it sounds like it's rounded. What I was saying a minute ago was that with 1% growth rate, we're not going to need external financing. With 2% growth rate, we will need external financing. Where's the crossover rate? Where is that, if you will? Where do we break even? That's the internal growth rate. Okay? So if sales grew at exactly that rate, then we would still not need any financing. But kind of more theoretically, and to kind of address Justin's concern here, if we grew at even that much more than that, then technically we would need to raise a penny. Okay. And I rounded it to the dollar, because I ain't getting down to the penny on this one. Okay.
My question came down to is how far out would you have to go? Because I looked down and saw that the internal growth rate is 3643788, and I just put 3644. I mean, if I go one more decimal place, does it really make?
Well,
you're talking, you're 100 or a million, whatever. What if that one's just a billion? So you're $1 now, $1,000.
all right. Let me throw that back. Let me throw that back at you. Let's say that you're running your business, whatever your real business is, and you're doing this calculation, and you decide it's one, I'm thinking 1.37. Okay, so you're actually doing this calculation, and you calculate that you have to borrow, let's say, $92. Okay. In the real world, what are you gonna do?
I don't worry about it. I'm saying, what if that's 92,000?
Okay, what if it's 92 million? What if you're working for Aon down the street, and you figure out that you have to raise $92,365,008. You got to raise that amount of money right there. That's what when you do these calculations, you have to raise $92,365,801. Your real business right now, this afternoon, what are you going to do? Raise 93 million or 92 million. Okay? So what we're doing, we're being very precise here in the classroom. Okay? But I mean, in real world circumstances, because there could be errors in here. Keep in mind, this is assuming that we're going to grow at 1.37%. Okay? Here's a reality of forecasting, which you probably all know, I hope. Is that going to be correct?
No.
No. We will never, you'll never hit it exact. And if you do, you got lucky. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. If you hit it exact, you got lucky. Okay? Now, if you average over time, hopefully, when you average your errors, they average out to 0, which is kind of what we're doing with our performance evaluation here in a little while. But you're never going to hit it exact. Okay? So my point is that this is a starting point, so we're calculating it exactly here. But when we actually go, and I can't stand to use the word operationalize, because a professor that I had used to use that word all the time, and I didn't like him. But if we operationalize this, then that's just going to be a guide. Okay? So does that answer your
Yeah, I
question?
was just trying to figure out the relevance of it, being that it's just a guide that kind of tells you.
The relevance of it is that assets cannot grow at an unlimited rate without the necessity to finance that growth. That's the reality of it. You have to you're going to have to finance the growth. That's what I was just getting across with Tommy. Okay? If sales are growing such that we need to start purchasing, we need to ramp up buying more machines. Okay, we got to go rent more office space. We got to buy more materials for inventory to meet the supply, so forth and so on, because our sales are growing that big. At the same time, our receivables are going up because our credit sales are going up as well. So we're making all these sales and we're going to collect the money, but we have this timing difference. Because we're selling it, but we're not going to collect the money, but we still got to go buy the materials. We still got to pay our employees. We still got to make the payment on the machines. How are you going to do that? Seek financing. Seek financing. Okay? Okay, other questions? Other questions? Okay, good. Okay, so that is the internal growth rate. All right, again, how fast our sales can grow without seeking external financing. The next one is the sustainable growth rate, which is a similar calculation, except we're using ROE instead of ROA. So it's a similar calculation, except we're just going to use ROE instead of ROA for our sustainable growth rate.
Can you give the definition of the SGR? What is the
Yes.
definition?
Yeah. What is the definition?
ROE times B.
Well, that's how we.
No.
All right.
But what is it?
We're playing semantic. How we calculate it
Yes.
is this way. What the sustainable growth rate is telling us is our maximum growth rate, okay, without seeking external equity financing, so we can borrow, okay, but our maximum growth rate without seeking external equity financing and without increasing our debt-to-equity ratio. So this is the maximum, sales growth that we can enjoy without seeking external equity financing, so we can still borrow, and without increasing our debt-to-equity ratio. And why would you think that the debt-to-equity ratio would be important in this calculation? And I've mentioned it at least once this semester already.
That increasing leverage?
Yeah. If we increase our debt-to-equity ratio, then we increase our leverage, which does what to our business? Makes it more risky. Very good. Makes it more risky. So, our sustainable growth rate, we're borrowing, okay, but because sales are going up, equity is also going up. Right? So this is telling us how much growth we can sustain from borrowing without increasing the leverage in our business, without making the business more risky. Okay. For example, using these numbers, going through the same process that we just did, I told you we already calculated the ROE here, so in this case, our ROE is 0.0645. 0.0645. Our plowback ratio is still 2.5. And then 1 minus all that stuff gives us a sustainable growth rate of 3.34. Rounded. 3.35%. Okay? So far so good? All right, so over here in the output section, I still have our deficit financing needs. I also threw in the debt-to-equity ratio, and the forecasted debt-to-equity ratio assumes that whatever our deficit is financed through borrowing. Because again, under the sustainable growth rate, we can borrow. All right, so this is the maximum growth without obtaining external equity financing. Okay, so you with me on that? Yeah. Yeah. Sustainable growth rate is the return on equity times our